Okay, are we live? Well, welcome again, and I'm so glad you're here. Especially we got college students back in town. You guys, good to see you guys. And some of our teens are over here, especially to y'all. Even though some of them went to go help with Shine Time. And then just everybody that's here for whatever reason or for wherever you're from. Just glad you're here. And like I said, come hungry because it's already been mentioned a couple times. So we just keep saying it. If you're thinking, oh, I didn't bring anything, I forgot, just come on, man. We got to have plenty. So it's all right. We just want you to bring you, and that'll be a wonderful gift. So if you can, come over right here and join us right after we finish. We've been talking about what did Jesus do, and I want to keep mentioning that because I love to teach and I love to preach, and I hope you love to learn and study about Jesus. There's nothing better. You can't overlearn about Jesus. You can't overteach about Jesus. There's a lot of things you can overdo. You can't overdo that. You know, Jesus could have come, because you think about it, wouldn't he have a right to come? He's God. He's the Son of God. He's the creator of the world. He is just, read Colossians 1. Look at Revelation. Look at the way he's described in all the New Testament. He could have come in all of this glory, could have ripped the sky apart, blown the world, just, shook the world, and every trumpet in heaven sounded, and a giant staircase come down, and just everybody on their face, everybody freaking out, terrified, and to the millions of angels and all of the glory and the glamour and the vastness, he could have come down and everybody knew it and everybody was scared and everybody was in, whoa, and he could have done that. But how did he show up? When he came and stepped into human flesh and came to this world for the years that he was here, in what manner did he come? Just stomping down, here I am, thundering, everybody on your face. He sure could have. He'd have had that right. But became a little baby in a little manger. He was born in a barn, laid in a feeding trough, in a little podunk nowhere town, in a little nowhere country, in a little spot. Hardly anybody knew or cared the day he was born. They do now. In the years since, more has been said and written about Jesus. He has more influence and impact on the world than everybody else in history combined. All the generals, all the armies, all the artists, all the rock stars, everybody. But he came as a servant. Mark 10:45, Jesus said this about himself: even the Son of Man didn't come to be served, and he could have. Sure had the right to. Look who he is. He could have said, everybody on your knee, everybody on your face. Now, there'll come a time when everybody will. But it wasn't this time. He said, I came not to be served, but to serve. He says, that's why I'm here, to serve the Son of God, the King of Kings. Stepped out of heaven to serve? Really? Yeah. And to give his life as a ransom for many. A ransom, of course, is when's a ransom given? I mean, somebody's been kidnapped. Somebody's been taken and held, and their life is at stake. And the payment to release them from that captivity is the ransom. Well, yeah, and as we will see at the cross, that's what he does. He pays the price that we paid. See, this wasn't anything new. Jesus was prophesied as a servant all the way from the prophecy. For example, he'll say in Matthew 12, and he's going to hearken back to some words from Isaiah. Jesus, aware of this, withdrew from there. Many followed him, and he healed them all. And he warned them not to tell who he was. And this was to fulfill what was spoken through Isaiah. Isaiah wrote about 700 or so years before Jesus shows up on the earth. And here's what Isaiah's quote is in caps there. It says, behold, and look how he is referenced. The Messiah who would come, my servant, whom I have chosen, my beloved, in whom my soul is well pleased. I put my spirit upon him, he shall proclaim. See, and then so Jesus, Jesus, his servant nature is probably most poignantly or most powerfully exemplified in John 13, because there was this time. They're in the upper room. It's hours away, Jesus knows, from the time the trial, the crucifixion, and the suffering, and that sacrifice to pay that ransom would begin. But before that, he is with his 12, and he's going to share a lot of things that are mentioned in John chapters 13 through 16. And starting this off, they've had the Passover, they've done all these things that they'll do. And he says, knowing that the Father had given all things into his hands, that he'd come forth from God, was going back to God. Here's what Jesus does. He gets up from supper, lays aside his garments, the outer garment, cloak there, and he takes a towel and he wraps the towel around himself, and he pours water into a basin, begin to wash the disciples' feet and dry them off with a towel. And of course they're freaking out. They don't understand. They're like, what are you doing? Peter's like, whoa, because see, in that culture, foot washing was a normal thing that was done when somebody came to your home to stay with you or to visit. Everybody wore sandals, and there was dusty roads. They didn't have asphalt. They just had dusty dirt roads. And people would get kind of dirty and dusty from about the knees down. And so you would have a foot washing for your guests. But I guarantee you the head of the house would never, ever condescend to do something like that, because that job was considered the lowest of the lowest of the lowest job anybody could do. So you got the lowest level household slave to do that, or your servant or your employee or your youngest child or whoever it was to do that. And yet, so when Jesus, who's Jesus, he gets down, all of a sudden he gets down, he's like, okay, fella, he gets in front of these guys and their dirty feet. He takes to water in a towel and starts working his way down the line. Can you imagine what they're doing? They're going, what's he doing? Well, Peter's Peter, right? Remember, he would sometimes speak before he would think, or he would just think out loud. I can really relate to Peter, because I'm forever putting my foot in my mouth, often to the knee. And so he's like, hey, wait a minute, what are you doing? Because he doesn't get this. He's like, Jesus, you're not supposed to be, dude, this is backwards, this is wrong. And he doesn't get it. And he says, no, you're not going to wash my feet. That wouldn't be right. You're you, Jesus. And Jesus said, if you don't let me, you don't have any part with me. He's like, oh, and you got to love Peter's heart. He's like, oh, well then here, all of me. And just, he's just all in with Jesus. I love that spirit. We're going to talk about that all-in-ness here in a couple months. And Jesus makes the point later on. He said, if I, who am your teacher and Lord, if I washed your feet, you got to wash one another's feet too. That's the point. I'm teaching you something here. This wasn't about hygiene. This wasn't about just, having clean feet. It's a representation of giving yourself away in service to other people. And he says, if Jesus, who's Jesus, do it, then the people who call themselves by his name, Christians, how much more then should we be doing the same? Now, does it mean literal washing the feet? No, washing of the feet can manifest itself in 100,000 different ways, doesn't it? And I see it all the time. I bet you do too. People that help other people. Just this morning, I'm on Facebook and I see a video taken at Eastern Michigan from a story about some football players from Eastern Michigan University. And there's this one guy they're featuring here in this video, and he's, of course, this big guy's a lineman, but he's kind of a walk-on. He doesn't have a scholarship. But he works multiple jobs. This guy's donating blood to be able to afford to come to school and work in multiple jobs, killing himself, getting up early, staying late, working hard at practice. Everybody's come to love him on the team. And finally, after a couple of years of that, there's one of these other players who's become like a brother to him. The team's tight, they're close. And there's this thing where they film the actual footage where the coach gets up there and he starts mentioning that here's all the players in the little auditorium, and he mentions this one guy and how he does this, and he said, but this fellow over here loves him so much, he came to me the other day, he says, I want to give my scholarship to him so that he can play football and he can stay here and not kill himself in the process. And The guy didn't even know that, and all of a sudden everybody just swarms the guy. Yeah, you know, that's washing one another's feet. You see it. People help somebody with a flat tire, and they pull over. People help somebody who has a need, and they have a way to help. If somebody has a need and you have some way to help or encourage or to do something to give yourself to somebody else, that's washing feet. And Jesus showed us that. Jesus was a servant. Look at the way Paul describes Jesus in Philippians 2. He says, who, although he existed in the form of God, he didn't require equality with things to be grasped, means to be held on to. I've got all of this glory and glamour and vast deity and all of this magnificent heavenly power. And he could have been jealous of that and said, no, I'm not turning loose of this to go down there with those humans. And he said, I'm going to lay that aside. He emptied himself. How do you serve people? Sometimes you got to do that. You got to empty yourself of self. You got to get over you. That's my biggest obstacle. I don't know about yours in serving. And he says, taking the form of, bondservant. That's a word that's often used, sometimes back and forth can be used, bondservant or slave. And, that's serious. And being made in the likeness of a man, he gave himself in service. Wow. It was his purpose. His purpose was to serve. Even the Son of Man did not come to serve. As we just saw, he gave his life as a ransom. Now, here in Luke 22, he says, Jesus talking, he says, who's greater? Jesus, he taught so much with questions. He was like the master at teaching, asking questions that made you think. Questions that made the point. Here's one of the so many that he did. He said, who's greater, the one who reclines at the table or the one that serves? The owner of the house or the waiter? Going, sir, would you like more? Just quietly going about. Which one's in culture and in society, who's considered the greater? Right? The guy that owns the house or the slave that works there? And the answer would be, duh. It's the guy that owns the house, the master of the house. And Jesus said, I have the right, he being who he was, to assume that role of master of the house and then act accordingly. Walk around going, everybody bow, kiss my ring, grovel in front of me. But he doesn't take that posture. He said, I'm among you as the one who serves. Wow. So if the one who was the only one that had the right to exalt himself doesn't, then we who don't have the right to exalt ourselves mustn't. And we learn from Jesus. So a servant, there's some characteristics of a servant. He's teaching us, if I'm a servant, he's the ultimate servant, then we who are his people, who follow in his steps, we've got to learn to be served. Now, who has nailed this, by the way? Show of hands. Who's just completely figured this all out and got this just done? I'm a complete servant. Yeah, me either. And so let's look at, so we all got work to do still. Now there's some people that are natural servants. My wife is one. And I know I could name a whole bunch of names. A bunch of you are too. And praise God for that. Thank you. And but even all of us could probably fan that flame even higher. And there's some like me. I'm not a natural servant. It doesn't come naturally or easy. I got to work on it. So what can we do? Well, we look at some of the characteristics of a servant. First of all, a servant's obedient. They have to just submit themselves in obedience. Understand that there's a master and there's a servant. And guess which one I'm not? He's king. He's Lord. He's Jesus. And so I am his bondservant. Yeah, I'm his slave. That's not a nice word. There's a horrible, terrible, tragic, nasty history with that word. The fact is, in Christ, we are his slaves voluntarily, where we bow in submission to him and say, I want to be your servant forever. Romans 6 says, don't you know, when you present yourselves to someone as slaves for obedience, that's us. Those three words could be what it means to be a Christian, slaves for obedience. You are slaves when you do that to the one whom you obey. Either, we can't say, nobody has the option to say, well, slave's bad. I'm not going to be anybody's slave. Sorry. I kind of get where you're coming from, kind of understand that. But the fact is we don't have that option. The fact is you're going to be his slave or his slave. You can be slave to the world and the evil one, or slave to God. You choose, you get the right to choose, but slave to nobody is not an option. You're either slaves to the one whom you obey, either sin and resulting in death, or of obedience resulting in righteousness. So what for you, what shall it be? But thanks be to God that though you were, he's written this to Christians, slaves of sin, you became obedient from the heart to that form of teaching to which you were committed. When we obey the gospel, we change our allegiance. We change sides. And I say to Satan and the world, done with you. We're done. And we commit wholeheartedly for life, for eternity, to bow as slaves to God, gladly, willingly, voluntarily. A slave also has a certain kind of mindset, a certain kind of motive. And his motive is, I want to do whatever my master says. Basically, it's that idea that we sometimes see in history, where somebody will present themselves, a general or a military person will, in the medieval times, we sometimes see it in movies, and they will take the knee or they will lay on the ground and they'll take the boot of the king and they'll put it on their neck, or they will bow in submission and say, command me. Basically, I'm yours. You send me, use me, tell me what to do, tell me where to go, however you want it. It's up to you, and whatever you do, if you say run through the brick wall, I will kill myself trying to do that if necessary. And in John 4, Jesus says, here's what this is the kind of servant he was. He shows us what it looks like to be like this. Because people are always trying to get Jesus to do this and do that and have this agenda and that one. He would say, here's my food, here's what I want. My food is to do the will of the one who sent me and accomplish his work. So that begs the question, what's yours? What's your food? What is the thing that drives you? What do you hunger for? To do your will? Or the world's, to just go with the flow of the world's flow? You know how they say, sometimes we spend too much time going with the flow. And they say, what's that saying? Only dead fish always go with the flow. A lot of times you got to swim upstream. And a servant here's what his desire is. Here's what just burns within him. The passion of his heart. I want to please my master. I want to please him. I want to make him happy. See, you notice on all of these, he's looking beyond self. He's getting away from self, and he is stepping past that, beyond that, to someone who matters more, and then the master. 2 Corinthians 5:9 says, therefore we have as our ambition, whether at home or the absent, to be pleasing to him. It's our ambition. Ambition can be a good thing. It can really be fuel that propels a career, or propels somebody to work harder, to study harder, to learn more, take care of their family, whatever it is. It can be used in a good way. It can also be negative too, right? We know. And so, but we kind of get what ambition is. That's that drive. It really propels you. And it's the fuel for forward motion towards a goal. And Paul says, my goal is to please my master, to please my Jesus. And so how are we going to do that unless we know what his will for us is, what his directions are? We got to be people of the book, man. We got to be in the Word. Now, you'll see that so many of the writers of the New Testament Gospels, in the very first verse of so many of these books, here's 5 of them, as they, in the typical first century letter writing style, you would introduce yourself in the very first line. You say, hi, I'm Paul, this is Peter, this is Jude, this is whoever, and you would describe yourselves. Every one of these, first verse of Romans and James, Jude, and the book of Revelation, 2 Peter, these guys describe themselves using that term bondservant. And I looked up Well, left it in my office, but kind of looked up what a bondservant is, and it has to do with somebody that just is bound to the will of one who is a master to them. And of course, in society, that can be, usually that's involuntary. You don't have any choice. But not the bondservants that we are. It is a voluntary willingness to just say, here I am. We present ourselves to the master every day. You get up, do it again, and do it again, and do it again. Here I am, Lord. What do you want me to do today? How do you want me to believe? What do you want me to do? How do you want me to think? How do you want me to speak? How do you want me to feel? How do you want me to share your word? And on and on. So, of course, one of the things learned about servanthood is to learn what it's not, because like so many other things, there's a lot of stuff out there that says, oh, that's what it means to be a servant, and it's not necessarily accurate. And you got to remember, it's not about power, place, or position. A lot of people think we need to have a title. We're not going to have out here, we're going to have servant badges, and degrees. Oh, look, I'm a 13th degree servant. What degree are you? I got a certificate on the wall that says University of Service. Yeah, and I studied for 12 years to get that thing. I'm working on graduate degree in serving. What about you? It's not about the things that the world elevates, and the world says, whoa, if you got a title and the corner office, you're the man, and you're bigger deal than the guy who doesn't. Well, that's how the world works, but that's not how the economy of the Lord works. And that's what we're a part of. Look what it says in Luke 22. And there was a dispute among them as to which of them was regarded to be the greatest. I'm messing up my slides again today. And he said to them, the kings of the Gentiles lord it over them. And we see that. That's how politicians do. They love power, position, and authority. They love it. I remember a video where one of these, just for example, to show you how this is so true in society. There's one of these committee meetings they have in Congress. I don't know which committee it was. And they'll have people come in and testify about different things. They had this guy's like a 5-star general. He's got stuff all over him, and he's like almost as high as you can go in the military. And he's giving testimony about something. And he addresses one of these senators just by her name, because that was her name. Oh, and that just flew all over her. She said, excuse me. I am Senator such and such. He says, and I worked really hard to get to be a senator. You will address me as Senator so-and-so. It was kind of rude, I'm like, dude, wow. He didn't take it well because he's like a 3, 4, 5-star general. He said, fine, you can call me general. Senator. And but that's how the world thinks, isn't it? We all deal with that all the time. Use my title, use my position, and I'm trying to my career and my job is to trying to be on a higher, loftier plateau than you are, so I can look down at you and go, and think that makes me somebody more important. He says, it is not to be that way with you. The one who's greatest among you must be like a servant. That's what was just read. And so here's the truth, and we know this. If you get into serving people, as more as we grow, here's what this is pretty obvious. This is probably not anything nobody knows. But it's not always convenient, is it? How many times have you been driving and maybe you got somewhere to go, you got things to do. We are busy people. And then there's somebody with a broken down on the side of the road or got a flat tire, and you're like, and we're like, happy place, didn't see it, because I gotta go, I got things I gotta do. And people, you know what? Can you imagine? Did you know that people don't schedule their crises according to my schedule? Can you believe how rude that is? People want me to counsel them or want me to talk to them or others that might need help. They might call at night. They might call when I'm doing something else. I'm like, you can't have a crisis today. I got stuff to do, right? Do we think that? Life happens, and it's not always going to be convenient for us. How convenient was it for Jesus? But a person that serves with the heart of Jesus is going to serve anyway, even when it's not convenient. He's not going to say, well, I'm going to schedule 30 minutes per day for serving time. And if there are any needs within that 30-minute slot, then sure, I'll be glad to help. But outside the 30 minutes, sorry. And it's not always fun either. Sometimes serving is work. Or it's messy, or it's awkward. It'll get you out of your comfort zone, and sometimes, for some of us, that might be why we avoid it, because we're like, I kind of like it in my comfort zone, because it's comfortable. It's not always going to be popular. It's not always going to be understood. If you do, like Jesus points out, that they're like, oh yeah, these guys over here, they do great things, but they do it for this. Oh, you're so wonderful. They'll pray in public and they'll make a big show out of their religion. He says, for the praise of men. And he says, and that's what they'll get. They'll get the praise of men. They'll get the applause. Wow. But that's it. God's not impressed. God doesn't applaud that. I would rather have an audience of one and do what will get the approval of God, even if perhaps it gets the disapproval of a bunch of humans. Whose approval do we seek? It's not always reciprocated. Sometimes, being humans, of course, it's natural that we want to do something for somebody, maybe hoping in the back, I hope they turn around and they're so overwhelmed. Wow, that was so great, that they'll just want to do something for me, or they'll tell everybody what a great guy I am, and wow, that's so cool. And what about if that doesn't happen? You don't get anything in return. They may not even say thank you. Or does it break our little egos, and does it hurt us? And are we just like, well, see if I serve any other people anymore. Phooey on that. What if Jesus took that attitude? How would that have worked out for the world? Because did everybody reciprocate things he did? Far from it. Some did. Remember, he heals 10 people. How many came back to say thank you? That's probably about the odds, It's going to be a minority. And so we just gotta be accepting and understand that that's just the way it is. And if I'm looking for the approval, then I'm looking for the wrong thing. But we just need to serve anyway. That's what Jesus did. He's not there for kudos. He's not there for a payoff. He's just there because that's what servants do. He is doing what is in the nature of God when he does it. He's not manufacturing the service. It's natural for him. So if I want to be more of a servant, what do I need to do? Get more of the heart of Jesus into me, and then my service will just naturally follow. Because I'll start more naturally doing more often the things that Jesus naturally did. And he was by nature a servant. So sometimes we think I've got to, have some kind of a manufactured technique. No, just be like Jesus. Get more deeply into the heart of Jesus. Get Jesus into the heart of you, and watch, you'll become more like him. And of course, we're going to say, yeah, but I'm busy. We're busy. We got school and career and kids and interests and things to take care of. We got lawns, we got chores, we've got health issues, we've got all kinds of financial constraints, those are real. But can we serve anyway? Yeah, we can. We sure can. So let's do. Within what's possible, we all have limits, but within those limits, we all can find a way to contribute. We all can find a way to give ourselves away for somebody else. It may take a phone call. It may take an email. It may take a hug. It may take just simple things. But service isn't just always just something really elaborate or expensive or massively time-consuming. Sometimes it's real quick and easy. But it's just investing yourself into the lives of other people for their benefit and to the glory of God. Jesus talked about the meeting of needs. Here's what it is. It's if somebody has a need. Remember the story of the Good Samaritan? Guy had a need. And you see from that parable of the Good Samaritan, you end up with criteria of, okay, who do we help then? Who do we serve? Jesus shows you, here's your criteria to help you know, well, who do I help then? Who do I serve? You ask yourself these two questions. Do they have a need? Do they have a pulse? If the answer to both of those is yes, help them in some way. We need to have a love for others. When we love others, we will more naturally and more easily kind of put ourselves out there to say, hey, is there a way I can help? You know, and sometimes maybe my help is only words of encouragement or just being present with somebody. Like somebody is grieving a loss. One of the most powerful things you can do is just be there. It involves a lifestyle of helping people. You know, we don't make a big thing about it. We don't draw attention to ourselves. We just go do it. And when people need to lighten their loads, Paul said, bear one another's burdens. Carry each other's load for a while. You guys, I hope, can remember there was a time when you were down and out. Think about now the time when you were broken, when you were hurting, when you were devastated, when you were at a loss, when you were just messed up, or and somebody came and somebody carried that burden for a while. And they might have been simple, like, hey, let's go get a cup of coffee. Let's go grab a burger. Let's just go, and they just let you vent. Or they put an arm around you, or they sent you a card in the mail that says, hey, I'm thinking about you, praying for you. You know, and also I got one from my sister-in-law just about 4 days ago. Brought tears to my eyes. Nicest thing she'd ever written to me. You know, and I was like, it just made such an impact on me. It's like, wow. I was like, I'm overwhelmed. And you remember the time somebody carried your burden? How do you pay them back? Go carry somebody else's for a while. Pay it forward to pay it back. Here's what servanthood is about. In Matthew 25, Jesus says this. Then the king, he's talking about this, judgment day kind of a thing, when we can separate the sheep and the goats, and those that will be his and those that won't be. And he says, then the king will say to those on the right, come, you who are the right were the ones that are going to go to glory with him. He says, come, you who are blessed by my Father, take your inheritance, the kingdom prepared for you since the creation of the world. Well, why do they get to do that? Here's why. For at least in this context, look at the criteria that he uses. I was hungry, and you gave me something to eat. I was thirsty, and you gave me something to drink. I was a stranger, and you invited me in. I needed, this. I can't remember. I think, see, it went off. I needed food. I needed food and drink. And he says, I was sick, and you looked after me. I was in prison, and you came to visit me. He says, the righteous go, Jesus? Question, when were you in jail? When were you sick? When were you in need of clothes or drink or food or help or whatever? Down and out. And he's like, here's how. Whatever you did for the least of one of these brothers of mine, you have done for me. That's Matthew 25, 34 to 40. So, man, this computer does that sometimes. Makes me nuts. Okay, so who's it for? Servanthood? It's for the Lord. First of all, we serve God. It says in Romans 12, not lagging behind in diligence, fervent in spirit, serving Lord. Before and above everything else and everyone else, we serve God. Okay, but and Hebrews 12:28 says the same thing. That we are his servants. We serve God first. The second, that we serve the laborers. That's each other. We are the laborers in the field of souls. We are God's people. We want to serve each other. 1 Peter 4:10 is each one has received a special gift, employing it. Look, employ it, put it to work in serving one another. As a good steward, you're a steward of the God's grace. That's the gift that's been given to you so that you can use it on behalf of somebody else. Galatians 5:13, through love, serve one another. Okay, so we serve the Lord, we serve the laborers, that's each other. And thirdly, we serve the lost. We've got to look beyond ourselves. We even got to look beyond this great group that we are. A wonderful, awesome, loving group of to the lost out there. There are people that don't know Jesus. And sometimes you're serving them, you don't know. It could open a door to somebody who needs to hear the gospel. As Paul said in 1 Corinthians 9, he says, though I'm free from all men, I have made myself a slave to just who? God? Just to God? No. Just the church? No. Everybody. Why? He has a reason for this. I want to win more. Win them to the Lord. To the Jews I became as a Jew, so that I might win Jews. To those under the law as those under the law, though I'm not under the law. And to the Gentiles, he says, well, to those who are without law as without the law, though not being without the law of God, but under the law of Christ, so that I might win those who are without law. To the weak, I became weak. That I might, why? Why'd you do that, Paul? To win the weak. I have become all things to all men, so that by all means I might save some. Let's do the same. So I'll leave you with these questions. Will you humbly and obediently serve God? Just let's recommit that every morning we get up and say, God, I'm yours today. What do you have me do? Send me, use me, employ me. Do whatever you want to do to me, God. Do that prayer every morning. Will you be willing to serve your brothers and sisters in Christ? So much of this is already happening, and praise God, it's beautiful. What if we were to fan that flame ever higher? And are you willing and ready to serve the lost? Take the beauty of your service out there and say, God, use me and send me to, it might be across the street, across town, who knows where. So do that, and I encourage you as we finish today, remember to take 5 before we head out and we pig out, all right? If there are any here that need to respond to the gospel, I encourage you to come and make your needs known while together we stand and we sing.
Have you a heart?